Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. As part of our new Inspiring TED Talks series, spotlighting can't-miss TED Talks and their key takeaways, today I explore Dan Pink's famous 2009 TED Global Talk, The Puzzle of Motivation. Welcome back to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I'm glad you're able to join me today for our latest installment of our Inspiring TED Talk series, today focusing on Dan Pink's famous 2009 TED Global Talk, The Puzzle of Motivation. In this TED Talk, he explores the different drivers of motivation of individuals, including within the workplace, and makes the argument that what businesses are doing does not align well with what the science actually says drives motivation to higher levels of performance and stronger organizational outcomes. Catch the first clip, and I'll catch you on the other side.
I need to make a confession at the outset here. A little over 20 years ago, I did something that I regret, something that I'm not particularly proud of, something that in many ways I wish no one would ever know, but that here I feel kind of obliged to reveal. In the late 1980s, in a moment of youthful indiscretion, I went to law school. Now, in America, law is a professional degree. You get your university degree, then you go on to law school. And when I got to law school, I didn't do very well. To put it mildly, I didn't do very well. I, in fact, graduated in the part of my law school class that made the top 90% possible. Thank you. I never practiced law a day in my life. I pretty much wasn't allowed to. But today, against my better judgment, against the advice of my own wife, I want to try to dust off some of those legal skills, what's left of those legal skills. I don't want to tell you a story. I want to make a case. I want to make a hard-headed, evidence-based, dare I say lawyerly case for rethinking how we run our businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, take a look at this. This is called the candle problem. Some of you might have seen this before. It was created in 1945 by a psychologist named Carl Duncker. Carl Duncker created this experiment that's used in a whole variety of experiments in behavioral science. And here's how it works. Suppose I'm the experimenter. I bring you into a room. I give you a candle, some thumbtacks, and some matches. And I say to you, your job is to attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Now, what would you do? Many people begin trying to thumbtack the candle to the wall. Doesn't work. Some people, and I saw somebody kind of make the motion over here, some people have a great idea where they light the match, melt the side of the candle, try to adhere it to the wall. It's an awesome idea, doesn't work. And eventually, after 5 or 10 minutes, most people figure out the solution, which you can see here. The key is to overcome what's called functional fixedness. You look at that box and you see it only as a receptacle for the tacks, but it can also have this other function as a platform for the candle. The candle problem.
In this opening clip, he describes how he's going to approach his exploration of the puzzle of motivation, explaining that he's going to use an evidence-based approach, much like a lawyer might use in a courtroom. Now, regardless of what you may think of various approaches of persuasion and argumentation, I am a firm believer that using evidence-based logic and understanding of complex phenomenon will ultimately lead us in the best direction. And what he's arguing throughout this TED Talk is that, in fact, what leaders and what businesses continually do doesn't actually match up with the science. It doesn't actually match up with the evidence. And he starts with the candle problem. In this next clip, he will be talking about the candle problem more and sharing some research behind it and how it connects with motivation.
Now, I want to tell you about an experiment using the candle problem done by a scientist named Sam Glucksberg, who's now at Princeton University in the US. This shows the power of incentives. Here's what he did. He gathered his participants and he said, I'm going to time you how quickly you can solve this problem. To one group, he said, I'm going to time you to establish norms, averages, for how long it typically takes someone to solve this sort of problem. To the second group, he offered rewards. He said, if you're in the top 25% of the fastest times, you get $5. If you're the fastest of everyone we're testing here today, you get $20. Okay, now this is several years ago, adjusted for inflation. It's a decent sum of money for a few minutes of work. Okay, it's a nice motivator. Question, how much faster did this group solve the problem? Answer, it took them on average 3.5 minutes longer. 3.5 minutes longer. Now, this makes no sense, right? I mean, I'm an American. I believe in free markets. That's not how it's supposed to work, right? If you want people to perform better, you reward them, right? Bonuses, commissions, their own reality show, incentivize them. That's how business works. But that's not happening here. You've got an incentive designed to sharpen thinking and accelerate creativity, and it does just the opposite. It dulls thinking and blocks creativity. And what's interesting about this experiment is that it's not an aberration. This has been replicated over and over and over again for nearly 40 years. These contingent motivators. If you do this, then you get that. Work in some circumstances, but for a lot of tasks, they actually either don't work or often they do harm. This is one of the most robust findings in social science and also one of the most ignored.
That's such a fascinating study, and it begs the question, why is it so ignored? And it's not just that one study. As he mentioned, this has been replicated over and over and over and over and over again. In fact, much of my own research has been around the areas of employee motivation, employee engagement, employee satisfaction, and how those connect with higher levels of performance and positive outcomes for firms and organizations. And the fact of the matter is, it is completely crystal clear how these motivators work. Now, of course, we can't paint with a broad brush and say every single person is going to be motivated the exact same way. But in the aggregate, it's extremely clear how these types of contingent rewards will impact people when you're trying to get them to do creative types of work.
I spent the last couple of years looking at the science of human motivation, particularly the dynamics of extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators. And I'm telling you, it's not even close. If you look at the science, there is a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what's alarming here is that our business operating system, think of the set of assumptions and protocols beneath our businesses, how we motivate people, how we apply our human resources. It's built entirely around these extrinsic motivators, around carrots and sticks. That's actually fine for many kinds of 20th century tasks. But for 21st century tasks, that mechanistic reward and punishment approach doesn't work, often doesn't work, and often does harm.
Again, all I can say is amen, absolutely. they can actually cause harm. They can actually demotivate. They can actually take away people's intrinsic motivation that they would have had, but then you start to attach an award to it, and all of a sudden you've sapped the intrinsic motivation out of the individual, and now they expect that reward, or they are looking towards the carrot and stick to drive their performance rather than tapping into their own purpose, their own meaning, their own intrinsic drivers and motivators. It is so crystal clear in the research, and it's been replicated literally thousands of times. I've replicated it and done it in my own research probably at least dozens of times in different papers and publications. And it's just crystal clear that it's right there in front of us. We need to find better ways to put this into practice within organizations.
Let me show you what I mean. So Glucksberg did another experiment similar to this, where he presented the problem in a slightly different way, like this up here. Okay? Attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Same deal. You were timing for norms. You were incentivizing. What happened this time? This time, the incentivized group kicked the other group's butt. Why? Because when the tacks are out of the box, it's pretty easy, isn't it? If-then rewards work really well for those sorts of tasks, where there's a simple set of rules and a clear destination to go to. Rewards, by their very nature, narrow our focus, concentrate the mind. That's why they work in so many cases. And so for tasks like this, a narrowed focus where you just see the goal right there, zoom straight ahead to it, they work really well. But for the real candle problem, you don't want to be looking like this. The solution's not over here. The solution's on the periphery. You want to be looking around. That reward actually narrows our focus and restricts our possibility. Let me tell you why this is so important. In Western Europe, in many parts of Asia, in North America, in Australia, white-collar workers are doing less of this kind of work and more of this kind of work. That routine, rule-based, left-brain work, certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of financial analysis, certain kinds of computer programming, has become fairly easy to outsource, fairly easy to automate. Software can do it faster. Low-cost providers around the world can do it cheaper. So what really matters are the more right-brain, creative, conceptual kinds of abilities. Think about your own work. Think about your own work. Are the problems that you face, or even the problems we've been talking about here, are those kinds of problems, do they have a clear set of rules and a single solution? No. The rules are mystifying. The solution, if it exists at all, is surprising and non-obvious. Everybody in this room is dealing with their own version of the candle problem. And for candle problems of any kind, in any field, those if-then rewards, the things around which we've built so many of our businesses, don't work.
I love his passion here. He's obviously getting worked up because it's so mind-boggling how so much evidence is so completely ignored in how organizations are structured, how work is designed, how HR processes are implemented, and how leaders lead. They simply don't work when you're shooting for innovation, when you're needing critical thinking, when you're needing people to solve problems. We need to find a different way. We need to go beyond the extrinsic motivators, the carrot and stick, the rewards for performance. We need to tap into their intrinsic motivations. We need to tap into their meaning and their purpose. We need to tap into those things that will help individuals connect with their work in a meaningful way. If we can do that, then we can find results that will ultimately drive higher levels of creativity, productivity certainly, innovation, and a whole range of different positive outcomes for organizations.
Now, it makes me crazy. And this is not, here's the thing, this is not a feeling, okay? I'm a lawyer, I don't believe in feelings. This is not a philosophy. I'm an American. I don't believe in philosophy. This is a fact, or as we say in my hometown of Washington, D.C., a true fact. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let me marshal the evidence here, because I'm not telling you a story. I'm making a case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Some evidence. Dan Ariely, one of the great economists of our time, he and 3 colleagues did a study with some MIT students. They gave these MIT students a bunch of games that involved creativity and motor skills and concentration. And they offered them for performance 3 levels of rewards. Small reward, medium reward, large reward. Okay? Do really well, you get the large reward, on down. What happened? As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay? But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Then they said, okay, let's see if there's any cultural bias here. Let's go to Madurai, India, and test this. Standard of living is lower. In Madurai, a reward that's modest by North American standards is more meaningful there. Same deal. A bunch of games, 3 levels of rewards. What happens? People offered the medium level of rewards, did no better than people offered the small rewards. But this time, people offered the highest rewards. They did worst of all. In 8 of the 9 tasks we examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance. Is this some kind of touchy-feely socialist conspiracy going on here? No, these are economists from MIT, from Carnegie Mellon, from the University of Chicago. And do you know who sponsored this research? The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. That's the American experience. Let's go across the pond to the London School of Economics. LSE, London School of Economics, alma mater of 11 Nobel laureates in economics. Training ground for great economic thinkers like George Soros and Friedrich Hayek and Mick Jagger. Just last month, economists at LSE looked at 51 studies of pay-for-performance plans inside of companies. Here's what the economists there said. We find that financial incentives can result in a negative impact on overall performance.
Here he cites several more studies that show the greater the reward, in fact, there's an inverse correlation and causation with performance. The greater the reward, the lower the performance. Now, you might question this and you may say, well, what about this? What about that? And the truth is, there is nuance here. He's presenting an overly simplistic case, and there are nuances across industries, across job types, job levels, across life stage and gender and some other demographic variables. There are some variations, but he's right overall that in the aggregate, absolutely, higher rewards don't always produce greater levels of performance, and in fact, oftentimes they can hurt performance. Pay in the workplace, it's what researchers call a satisficer. As a motivator, it's a satisficer. So pay is a little different than other motivators. You have to pay someone enough so that they don't need to worry about pay, that they know that they're being paid fairly, equitably, they know that they're being valued by the organization. That has to be there, otherwise they're going to be demotivated, and it's one of the quickest ways to demotivate somebody if they feel like it's not fair, it's not equitable. But just giving someone more pay or giving them a bonus or giving them this kind of additional perk or that perk, that in and of itself, for most people, doesn't actually do the job. And even if it does in the short term, it almost never does in the long term. So we have to think carefully about the assumptions we're making around what drives people's motivations.
There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what worries me as we stand here in the rubble of the economic collapse is that too many organizations are making their decisions, their policies about talent and people, based on assumptions that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted more in folklore than in science. And if we really want to get out of this economic mess, and if we really want high performance on those definitional tasks of the 21st century, the solution is not to do more of the wrong things, to entice people with a sweeter carrot or threaten them with a sharper stick. We need a whole new approach. The good news about all this is that the scientists who've been studying motivation have given us this new approach. It's an approach built much more around intrinsic motivation, around the desire to do things because they matter, because we like it, because they're interesting, because they're part of something important. And to my mind, that new operating system for our businesses revolves around three elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, the urge to direct our own lives. Mastery, the desire to get better and better at something that matters. And purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. These are the building blocks of an entirely new operating system for our businesses. I want to talk today only about autonomy.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. He lays these three elements out as the three driving intrinsic motivators for the modern workforce. Now, again, this is overly simplistic. There's certainly many other intrinsic factors that also play an important role in an individual's motivation. And it's important to note, again, that we're not a monolith. Like, every individual person has different salient motivators. And so what motivates me and what motivates my wife or what motivates my children is going to be a little bit different. And the person in the house down the street might be motivated slightly differently. We're at different life stages. We have different goals. We have different factors that go into the calculus of how we determine our salient motivators. That's to be sure. But the research does show, and it has shown for over 50 years, that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are very, very important. Among all of the intrinsic motivators, these are three very important motivators. And this is consistent with my own research. As I've already mentioned, I've done dozens of studies looking at the impacts of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, workplace relationship motivators, work-life balance motivators, and a variety of other demographic variations, not just in the US, but across the world, looking across 37 different countries, across all of the main continents, and looking at employees in all different job types, at different job levels, in different roles, in different size organizations. And consistently, purpose absolutely matters. Consistently, mastery and the opportunity to grow, that absolutely matters. And consistently, autonomy absolutely matters. And in the rest of his talk, he's going to be talking more about autonomy.
In 20th century, we came up with this idea of management. Management did not emanate from nature. Okay? Management is it's not a tree, it's a television set. Okay? Somebody invented it. And it doesn't mean it's going to work forever. Management is great. Traditional notions of management are great if you want compliance. But if you want engagement, self-direction works better. Let me give you some examples of some kind of radical notions of self-direction. And what this means, you don't see a lot of it, but you see the first stirrings of something really interesting going on. Because what it means is, it means paying people adequately and fairly, absolutely. Getting the issue of money off the table, and then giving people lots of autonomy. Let me give you some examples. How many of you have heard of the company Atlassian? Okay, looks like less than half. Atlassian is an Australian software company, and they do something incredibly cool. A few times a year, they tell their engineers, go for the next 24 hours and work on anything you want. As long as it's not part of your regular job, work on anything you want. So the engineers use this time to come up with a cool patch of code, to come up with an elegant hack. Then they present all of these stuff that they've developed to their teammates, to the rest of the company, in this wild and woolly all-hands meeting at the end of the day. And then, being Australians, everybody has a beer. They call them FedEx days. Why? Because you have to deliver something overnight. It's not bad. It's a huge trademark violation, but it's pretty clever. That one day of intense autonomy has produced a whole array of software fixes that might never have existed. And it's worked so well that Atlassian has taken it to the next level with 20% time, done famously at Google, where engineers can spend 20% of their time working on anything they want. They have autonomy over their time, their task, their team, their technique. Okay? Radical amounts of autonomy. And at Google, as many of you know, about half of the new products in a typical year are birthed during that 20% time. Things like Gmail, Orchid, Google News. Let me give you an even more radical example of it. Something called the results-only work environment, the ROW, created by 2 American consultants in place at about a dozen companies around North America. In a row, people don't have schedules. They show up when they want. They don't have to be in the office at a certain time or any time. They just have to get their work done. How they do it, when they do it, where they do it, is totally up to them. Meetings in these kinds of environments are optional. What happens? Almost across the board. Productivity goes up, worker engagement goes up, worker satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are the building blocks of a new way of doing things.
He shares 2 great examples of radical autonomy at Atlassian in Australia and Google in the United States. And there's many other companies that have done similar things over the past decade to try out utilizing autonomy as a motivator and as a driver to increase creativity, innovation, and productivity. And essentially what is found consistently over and over again is that certainly employees like autonomy. They don't like to be micromanaged. I don't know anyone who likes that. But they want to be able to be given the freedom to do the work that they want to do, that they're passionate about, and to do it in the way that they want to. And I mean, it's a simple notion, but when people are given that level of freedom, that level of autonomy, then often really great things can happen, especially when there's accountability tied to the autonomy. But it's not about how you do it. It's not about when you do it. It's just about what you accomplish, what you produce. And so it doesn't matter if you are working from the office. It doesn't matter if you're working from home. And I think this is probably particularly important to consider right now during a pandemic when we're trying to utilize more virtual workers. Frankly, autonomy matters. Autonomy makes a huge difference, and we can leverage it in many ways, particularly in a virtual workforce. So we need to think about ways to increase and enhance the meaningful autonomy that we give our employees.
Now, some of you might look at this and say, that sounds nice, but it's utopian. And I say, nope, I have proof. In the mid-1990s, Microsoft started an encyclopedia called Encarta. They had deployed all the right incentives. All the right incentives. They paid professionals to write and edit thousands of articles. Well-compensated managers oversaw the whole thing to make sure it came in on budget and on time. A few years later, another encyclopedia got started. Different model, right? Do it for fun. No one gets paid a cent or a euro or a yen. Do it because you like to do it. Now, if you had, just 10 years ago, if you had gone to an economist anywhere and said, hey, I got these 2 different models for creating an encyclopedia, if they went head-to-head, who would win? 10 years ago, you could not have found a single sober economist anywhere on planet Earth who would have predicted the Wikipedia model. This is the titanic battle between these 2 approaches. This is the Ali Frazier of motivation, right? This is the thriller in Manila, all right? Intrinsic motivators versus extrinsic motivators. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose versus carrots and sticks. And who wins? Intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, and purpose in a knockout. Let me wrap up. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And here's what science knows. 1. Those 20th century rewards, those motivators we think are the natural part of business, do work, but only in a surprisingly narrow band of circumstances. 2, those if-then rewards often destroy creativity. 3, the secret to high performance isn't rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive, the drive to do things for their own sake, the drive to do things because they matter. And here's the best part. Here's the best part. We already know this. The science confirms what we know in our hearts. So, if we repair this mismatch between what science knows and what business does, if we bring our notions of motivation into the 21st century, if we get past this lazy, dangerous ideology of carrots and sticks, we can strengthen our businesses, we can solve a lot of those candle problems, and maybe we can change the world. I rest my case.
Yes, I absolutely agree. There's a lot of danger in using a carrot and stick approach, using fear-based tactics to try to get compliance with what you want your people to do. It can work to an extent. You can get people to comply and to do what you ask them to do. But that doesn't foster any sort of commitment. It doesn't foster any sort of loyalty. And those people may perform in the short term, but they're not going to perform at high levels in the long term. And they're not going to be motivated in any sort of sustainable way. And so we need to look beyond carrot and stick. We need to look beyond fear-based tactics, and we need to look for those intrinsic motivators. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose are three of the very important intrinsic motivators, and of course there are others. Today he focused primarily on autonomy. Mastery and purpose, though, are also so important, and so much of the research that I do looks specifically at purpose. It looks at the role of meaningful work, having jobs that benefit society, doing work that will help other people and help address social challenges, social issues. These are the types of things that employees are interested in, that they're passionate about. And if you want to reduce turnover, if you want to foster higher levels of creativity and commitment and loyalty to the business, it's a no-brainer. The science is there. It's been shown repeatedly. We need leaders to understand this, and we need executives who are calling the shots to remember that people are, in fact, people. They're humans. They're not cogs in a machine that can just be manipulated with carrot and stick, but rather they're more nuanced than that. They're more complex than that. And so they're a mix of, yes, some extrinsic salient motivators, but also a whole range of intrinsic motivators that are actually more salient to them, that will actually drive higher levels of performance, creativity, innovation, commitment, loyalty, on and on and on and on. All these positive outcomes for organizations. As always, I hope you stay healthy and safe. I hope you find meaning and purpose at work each and every day, and I hope you have a great week. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.